Hey guys, GhazzyTV here with another video, and this time we have been playing the game Superfuse, which is in early access right now. You can actually check it out. Check out the link in the descriptions below to it. I've been playing this game for a little bit, and I've been looking into it for quite some time, and actually found myself enjoying the game quite a lot. Now, this game is in early access. There was definitely a couple of pros and cons of it being in early access. One of them being that you were actually in a position to provide feedback to the developers and kind of help steer the game to something that you would like to play in the future. And that's always the pro of any early access game in the industry. But the cons is obviously some of the performance issues with the game in general, which I think is perfectly fine. I'm not going to hold that over their head. The time I spent in the game was very enjoyable. However, there's a couple of things that I was not a very big fan of. First off was the UI of presenting the minions that you had summoned, of how many you could summon, and also not having the HP bar of your character above your character on the screen, but rather in the actual HP bar and the bottom. I was not a big fan of this type of approach, and having limited access to UI changes of these things, and controlling the amount of minions I had was very hard to do until I got used to it. And by basically just knowing that I could have a maximum of, say, 3 minions, I could look at the very bottom of my screen and see, hey, I had 3 minions as an example of that specific type. Other than that, I actually think the game was really cool. It was a nice breath of fresh air in general for the genre. Unlike other kind of games where you use flask system, where the flask itself gets its charges from either looting red blobs or goblins or whatever the fuck on the ground, you could, or like in Path of Exile, where you kill monsters, your flask gain charges. This game had a little bit of a different futuristic approach to it, which has both pros and cons. I found it rather refreshing, but also a bit annoying, and I'll tackle that a little bit quick before I go into the other aspects of the game experience I had. Basically, you loot this kind of a flask, if you will, and depending on where the level of the flask, it would be a stronger effect from it, basically. And the way you would get charges to this is actually automatic. So when you use the flask, it would automatically take a charge and fill itself from an inventory that you have by carrying them. And these charges that you could carry around would obviously be purchasable from the vendors, which is what I opted in to do eventually. But you can also loot them. And without a loot filter, there were so many of this, and when you clicked on one, it wasn't like a vacuum loot where you would pick up a ton of them around them. Instead, you'd actually single-handedly had to click on every single one of these charges. And when I was running with this build, you could actually use several life flasks at the same time if you clicked several of them. That was actually a really nice system for defensive layers or better region, but that would also speed up the consuming rate of these charges, which ended up with me basically going to the vendor and buying 200 of these charges to make sure I had them in my inventory. Now, I'm not a big fan of the whole clicking approach to it, but in general, I was very happy to see another take on the flask system. What it does compared to other ARPG games is allowing you to have flasks consistently be able to be used in things like boss fights without needing the boss fight to have an ads phase, if you will. That's something we see a lot in my main game that I play, which is Path of Exile, where boss fights have a tendency of having a sequence where you are expected to generate charges back to your flask when you're doing map bosses and whatnot. So the boss will jump away, bam, there's some ad spawning, now it's time for you to get some flask charges, and then, oh, the fight's about to start again. In this game, you don't really have that. There wasn't any pressure on that approach, which allows them to have a little bit more of a free hand in terms of designing the balances of endgame bosses. I'm a big fan of the artwork design of the game, though. It's very Borderland-ish, if you will, which is not a game that I got really hooked into myself, but I know a lot of you guys that are watching my content actually really love Borderlands, so I'd say that's a good thing. I myself, I'm a little bit tired of every single ARPG always needing to be so dark and gritty and medieval approach. Superfuse took that and just flipped it all the other side around. It's futuristic, it's rather colorful, and it just moves away from the whole medieval approach to it. I also found the skill system to be rather interesting with the way they set it up. Very basic compared to what I'm used to, but I don't think that basic necessarily has to mean that it's bad. I found it to be very easy to understand, so I think new and newer players diving into this game in the ARPG genre would actually find themselves having a good time and fully understanding the impact of their decisions, which I think is a good thing in today's industry. Where to start? there are 3 classes. I really don't know where to start. There are 3 classes. There's an Elementalist, which I haven't tried. Then there's a Berserker that I haven't tried. And then there's the Technomancer that looks this cool when he's walking around. I mean, look at this. This guy has like 2 different types of specs you can do. One being the minion stats, which is what I was doing with the melee minions, decoy minion, range minion, and a support minion. I never got to this one, which is apparently some bigger minion I can use, which is supposed to use an enemy as template. I never really got that far, trying to get more minions here. And then there's a metal mastery, which apparently gives us physical spell damage with different types of ability that allows us to basically act as a fist spell damage dealer. The game is still in early access, so there's some of these stuffs are still in development, so they don't work to my understanding. So that's kind of that approach. The skills are pretty cool though. So if you look at the minion stuffs that I have, they have a system, because I never played the game on December, and in there they have this grid system with your skills, and you can actually stack the same type of support fuse, as it's called, in this grid system to your ability. You can stack the same skill over and over and over again if you so wish. And your fuse capacity based on your character level. So right now I have up to 85, and I put them all into my laser beak, the range minions, and that leveled them up a lot. But I can only get the higher level of the actual skill based on my character level. So level 20 would level the build up, or the ability up, if I have enough fuse power, which you can see here. It says +3 to skill power. Here it says +3 to skill power. This one is 2 to skill power, for example, to level the build up or the skill up. Well, you can still support them. So I have all of my supports or my fuse skills in here. Since I have 75 out of 85, I can actually add another 10 to this. So, for example, say I wanted to add a critical strike. I don't think I do have another one. So this one is critical hit chance. I can actually add another one of those, which I don't have, but I do have a critical hit damage. So I can actually add this to the ability, and now I'm capped out, and I have all of it into my laser beaks. It's actually a pretty cool system. I had a lot of fun. The game's really responsive. It's definitely noticeable that it's early access, I'll tell you that. There's a couple of minor glitches and issues. All of them that needed resolving was fixed with a quick relog. And another thing to point out, I got myself a weapon that had a max laser beak at the bottom there in the list. That did not work. So there's definitely some... quite a few issues that needs to be resolved, but again, I think that's just scuffed up into the early access part of it. The gameplay itself felt comfortable. Voice lines and lore is something I completely give no shits about at all when it comes to RPGs, but I like when you're presented with them in small snippets. So, for example, in town, there's this item here called Maya's Diary. You encounter these throughout the gameplay, which will basically give you enough information of the lore to understand why you're doing something. And they have a really nice comic relief or comical touch to it, which I actually found really interesting. So if I click on the Maya's Diary, this is happening.
I don't buy the idea that they stowed away on a ship. Something's getting them. Shaft collapse? Gas pockets, maybe? Can't make protective gear if I don't know what the problem is.
So this is an NPC in the game, which is actually, she's actually standing here. So you actually encounter these things as you're playing throughout the area. So the area I got to was to the freezer level 2, which is towards the end of this first act. And I don't want to spoil too much, but there was a small snippets of information with the boss there, so I felt like I was kept up to date, even though I didn't always read through everything, because that's how I play RPG games, and I actually like that. It was basically provided enough information and lore to me to know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, without it feeling like a hassle and a nuisance to read through, 2 pages of fucking text of lore. Something, it fits me as the kind of playstyle that I have. Inventory management felt fine. I really don't have any other issues with it. It's early access glitches and bugs that was a little bit annoying, which I think is, again, early access issues. I don't really give it too much weight. They're not gonna hang it over their heads. The game's like $25 in early access. I definitely think that the money's worth the game for sure. And I really don't have much more to say to it. I enjoyed it. It was fun, and I like the comic relief and the artwork that they have in the game. Because most of the RPG, they go with this medieval fantasy approach, and they go with a dark and gritty Diablo 2 kind of approach. It's just gotta be medieval. Everything needs to be black. Everything needs to be skeletons and, dark dungeons and stuff like that. It's literally the opposite. I felt like it was colorful, and it was fine, it was fun, and the fact that they have this futuristic robotic approach to it was also a nice breath of fresh air. and I had a lot of fun with it. Yeah, you want to check out the game, check out the descriptions below the video. And that's all I have to say. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, stay safe. Keep rocking.